Hi everyone, and welcome to Shaluso and another episode of Watch Alternatives. And today we're going to be talking about 4 alternatives to the Rolex Daytona. That's right, we're taking on one of the kings of the watch world, one of the most popular watches, and of course one of the most popular chronographs. So starting out with a quick recap of the Daytona itself. So the Rolex Daytona 116500 LN has been with us since 2016, so about 3 years, and pretty much right out of the gate, it had waiting lists, it had premiums. New, it sells for $13,400. On the pre-owned market, however, it sells anywhere from $22,000 to $25,000 US dollars, some cases even more. So it sells for nearly double its retail price, and it's not like it was that low of retail price to begin with. But why is that? Well, especially because of the sale of the Paul Newman Daytona breaking records at auctions, there's been even more excitement about the Daytona. And there always has been for the last 20 odd years or so. Interestingly enough though, in its earlier years, right up to around sort of the 80s, it was actually one of Rolex's poorest selling models. Then it started building up a bit of traction, and really once it started it never stopped. And that's something that we can see with the rest of the Rolex range now, as other models like the Submariner and the GMT are also getting similar sort of treatment, selling for crazy pre-owned prices and wait lists at retail. And the watch itself, well, it does deserve at the very least its retail price. Think what you want about premiums, its retail price is justified. This oyster steel watch with the ceramic bezel and the column wheel chronograph on its caliber 4130. It's the chronograph movement with the least amount of parts on the market, and that helps it attain its tiny thickness of 12.5 millimeters. If you think about it, most chronographs usually clock in around 15 millimeters because it's a standard set by the ever popular Valjoux 7750. But even then, other ones made by in-house calibers are still clocking in at about that much, purely because of the complexity of it. Rolex, when they developed their caliber 4130, moving away from the El Primero movement, they made the effort to make sure they could reduce the amount of parts, because that would not only make it more reliable and have there be less to go wrong, but also it helped it be so thin, which adds to its versatility. But enough about the Daytona, let's look at some of its alternatives. And the first contender on the list is the Montblanc Timewalker manufacturer. Now, I've spoken about Montblanc on this channel before in my recent review of their Meisterstück from 2003, and since then they've made a lot of advancements. They purchased the Minerva company in 2007, and in the last few years especially, they've made a lot of efforts to make manufacture movements and to make watches that are more serious for watch people as opposed to just fashion accessories. And the new Timewalker manufacturer reflects that. Now, I must first say that while they do call it a manufacture movement, the MB2510 is actually based on the IWC 69370, IWC being a stablemate of Montblanc in the Richemont group. So it is technically a manufacture movement if you consider they are part of the same company. However, it's not strictly a manufacture movement in the sense it's not actually made by Montblanc, and it doesn't compare to some of their in-house Minerva movements that they do make, but they do obviously sell for a lot more. And speaking of selling for a lot more, this watch, despite still having a relatively in-house movement and a ceramic bezel, stainless steel and bracelet, chronograph, date, the works, it sells for only $5,700, which is very competitive when you compare it to the Daytona's retail price and when you compare it to some of the other watches in the market as well. And the big benefit for the Montblanc more than anything is its distinctive look. Similar to that Meisterstück that I featured in another video, Montblanc, what they do is they take a few key points from other watches, but then they put their own spin on it, and they've really done a good job in terms of making something that still ends up being unique, but you can still see certain inspirations. So obviously it does take the Panda Dial, but they offset that by putting details such as the nice fine knurling on the pushers and on the crown. Or they've got those Arabic numerals at the unconventional position of 2, 4, 8, and 10, as opposed to, for example, 12, 3, 6, and 9, which is usually where companies will put Arabics if they're going to be not using indices. So little details like that differentiate it, give it its own personality, while still harking back to models that we love and providing an affordable, in relative terms, alternative to some of the more desired models on the market. But let's say you don't want something that takes details from other models. Let's say you want something that actually has its own history and provenance. Look no further than the TAG Heuer Autavia. Instead of taking cues from other watches, what they did is they re-released one of their historic models, the Autavia, but with a little bit of a modern flair. The Autavia was actually crowd designed, so when they were designing it, they actually took the public's input in terms of the design direction of the watch itself, and the watch you see here is one that's actually been designed by TAG Heuer fans, with criteria provided by the TAG Heuer brand itself. But it still pays homage to their historic 60s and early 70s Autavias, still maintains that history with things like that beads of rice bracelet and the faux patina to give it that vintage feel, but with all the modern luxuries that you would want in a watch. It still has a ceramic bezel. It has a see-through case back in which you can see a modern manufacture movement, which is the Heuer 02, which was loosely based, in fact, on designs for the 1960 CH80 caliber, which was also an in-house design as well. Oh, and did I happen to mention it has a 75-hour power reserve? So of all the watches you're going to hear today, this is the only one that not only gets close to the Daytona's one, it actually eclipses it by 5 hours, the Daytona having a 70-hour power reserve. So on a technical front, it definitely meets it, but let's face it, this watch is all about the look. You look at it and right away it screams to you vintage racing appeal. And the only real thing that gives you a hint that it is a modern watch is the fact that it has modern build quality, so it's the best of both worlds. And coming in at $5,450 US, it's also an amazing value. It even comes in cheaper than the Montblanc, but still coming from a brand that actually has proper pedigree in watchmaking and proper pedigree in racing chronographs specifically. So definitely something to consider if you want a racing inspired chronograph but don't want to shell out the crazy money for a Daytona. But let's say you want to get a little bit crazy. Let's say you want to have something that's a little bit more than just a value proposition. You want to have something that's modern that actually changes the game and moves the game forward. That's why you have the Zenith, Defy, El Primero 21. It's a bit of a mouthful of a name, but it's definitely worth it. And the key thing there is the El Primero. The El Primero movement was actually featured in the modern Daytona from 1988 up until 2004. So there is a connection and a rivalry. But Zenith has gone in a completely different direction with their chronograph. They've made it in titanium, they've given it a modern design without having to worry about paying homage to their previous models or to history. They've made a watch for the 21st century. And that's something I love about Zenith, is that they're not scared to take these risks and make a modern watch without having to lean on their history, but without forgetting it. They are still using essentially the same movement, albeit with a lot of modifications and modernizations, that they've had since 1969. It's the longest running chronograph movement in production. So it has history, but still with a firm look at going forward. Made entirely of titanium with a ceramic bezel, the materials quality on this is fantastic, and the design is unique, and it'll be light on the wrist. And in addition to that, it features a 1/100th of a second chronograph, which beats out most modern chronographs and gives you a lot more precision when timing anything. So as a timing instrument, it's also a lot more advanced, and also the actual motion of it looks more interesting as well. And the modern materials doesn't end on the outside. On the inside, it also has a silicone escapement and a carbon nanotube balance spring. So they've continued modernizing on the inside, but still paying homage to their history. That being said though, all of this modernization comes at a price. At $11,300, it is very close to the Daytona's retail price. But when you factor in how difficult it is to get a Daytona at retail, it makes it a lot more accessible and a lot more unique. At the end of the day, no one will confuse this for a Daytona. They'll look at it right away and see that it is something special, it is something different. And then last but not least, we couldn't take the fight to Rolex without mentioning its main competitor, Omega. Specifically, the Omega Speedmaster Racing Master Chronometer. Normally Omega's chronographs, you associate them with the Moonwatch, but I feel like their Master Chronometer range, both for the Moonwatch and for the Speedmaster Racing, go extremely underappreciated. So that's why I really wanted to highlight it, because of the uniqueness, because of the fact they don't get a lot of coverage. So if you look into one of these, chances are you're not going to be the common pack, you're not going to be the one who has just a normal Moonwatch. And let's face it, Omega has done a great job in modernizing their movements and creating new movements that elevate the bar and the standard. The Daytona may have its parachrom balance spring and its superlative chronometer status, but the Omega with its caliber 9900 features a silicon escapement, co-axial technology, COSC and META certifications, a time zone function so that you can jump hours quickly and easily without having to hack the balance, a 2-register layout with a date, but that still doesn't sacrifice timing hours because they have hours and minutes on the chronograph on the register to the right. They've made every effort to really take the fight and add a lot of value. And yes, true, its power reserve isn't the same 70 hours, it's only 60, but at least you can see the movement and see how beautifully decorated it is, albeit still in a machined and automated fashion, but it still looks really nice and you can appreciate it through that sapphire case back. On the outside, of course, it does meet all the requirements with its ceramic bezel, Panda Style color scheme, but also a much more low-key bracelet. It's almost fully satin finished, so it's not going to be scratched as easily, but it still has little flourishes of polish on the center links, but not so much that it's ostentatious or gaudy, and more importantly, not so much that it's going to get scratched. And coming in at $8,750 US, this also happens to undercut the Daytona, and when you factor in pre-owned pricing, you're going to undercut the Daytona by a lot. So definitely something to consider. If you want something that has that racing look, that has details like the checkered flag on its minute track, things that will give you that racing feel, but without having to pay the crazy entry fee that is the Daytona Club. So those are my 4 alternatives to the Rolex Daytona. Now this list could have gone on forever, but I did want to keep it pretty compact, and I did want to keep it within those constraints of still having that Panda layout, still having that black ceramic bezel, and being on a bracelet. So let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see a follow-up of this, maybe broadening the horizon a bit, looking at other iconic chronographs that would compete not necessarily on just a materials basis, but just maybe on an icon level basis. But in any case, let me know in the comments below what you think of all these watches and what other Daytona alternatives you think there are out there that you'd want to see featured in the future. And if you like this video, please do like it and share it. And of course, if you like seeing new watch content every week, then make sure you subscribe to Shaluso as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.